Welcome to part 2 of Overdetermined's Elden Ring lore through. In this series, we are taking a sort of slow approach to Elden Ring, taking our time to read all the item descriptions, think about what they might mean, just admire the game as well. But without any further ado, let's get into it. And our person here is a dragon pilgrim who has come to this land in search of dragon communion. We made it all the way to right before the tutorial last time, and I believe we got some items last time, so we have some item descriptions to read. So let's get into it. Actually, we have quite a few item descriptions to read, it looks like, so let's sort of get through them. Flask of Cerulean Tears. A sacred flask modeled after a golden holy chalice that was once graced by a tear of blessing. Filled with cerulean tears, this flask restores FP with use. Rest at a site of grace to replenish. The one washed up on the gravesite was sure to die until this flask offered its gift of rejuvenation, to seek the Elden Ring. I think we are meant to assume that the mysterious woman who we saw in the cutscene just moments ago is the one who gave us this flask of cerulean tears. She seems to think that we are meant or fated or she wants us, just like flat out she wants us to seek the Elden Ring. And I think that's supported in the last paragraph of this item description here. The design itself, the flask has a tree along the top of it with roots all on the liquid holding part of the flask. And there was some sort of blue liquid in there. This is one of those fantasy, don't think too hard about it tropes, I think. The first paragraph of the item description here is really interesting, though. There is a golden holy chalice that serves as some sort of sacred relic, right, or sacred object of worship that is prominent enough that people build flasks around them, and presumably not just flasks, right? It'd be odd for this to be the only sort of thing that is related to this chalice. The flask itself is golden, as the chalice is. Gold as a color, I think, is pretty clearly associated with this sort of tree religion, right? That we get here even without entering the game. The golden holy chalice itself also once graced by a tear of blessing. This sentence itself to me is also overdetermined. So there's so many words here that carry so much meaning through the rest of the game, right? So once graced. Grace itself there are sites of grace, there are the lands between rune. We saw there's gold that graces people's eyes who inhabit the lands between. Tear of blessing, also another phrase that requires a lot of interpretation, or another phrase that you can use as a sort of catalyst for all types of interpretation. So the golden chalice, I think we can presume, is catching tears, right? And the tears are blessed in some way, are holy in some way. So to me, this begs the question, whose tears? To my knowledge, trees don't cry, really. You could sort of imagine that metaphorically sap is coming down from the tree and people are calling that tears, but I think that's a possibility. But that just doesn't read very well to me onto this word tear. We are also drinking tears that are replenished by grace. So whoever is granting the grace is perhaps crying tears of, I would say, presumably sadness or grief. It'd be odd to build a religion around someone who is crying tears of happiness, right? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe not that odd, but nonetheless, short version begs two questions: one, whose tears? And two, why are they crying? And why are their tears being replenished by grace? Does this mean that there is someone out there crying who is still crying, right? That's how the tears are continually being refreshed. I don't know. Again, implications abound, but we don't have a ton to go off here. The Crimson Tears is just the same description. This flask restores HP, this one restores FP. Not a ton to talk about there. We don't care. Cracked pot. We didn't read this last time. This empty pot somehow mends itself when broken. Essential vessel for crafting cracked pot items. The materials and magics sealed within deploy their effects when the pot is thrown. Not a ton to talk about here. Pots are going to become very prominent in the story, which is sort of funny that the item description here doesn't really give us anything. It somehow mends itself when broken, which to me is just nothing really. It's just like gameplay working itself into the lore rather than the other way around, which you have to do as a game developer. Bandit boots. Leather boots worn by bandits, light for ease of movement and supple for masking sound. In trade, they offer little damage negation. Each piece of armor gives a certain amount of damage negation. You can see those values here. These are, as you can imagine, pretty low, which is fine. As a thief, you're trying not to get hit. Otherwise, not really a ton to talk about there. Bandit manchettes. Manchettes made by simply wrapping dirty cloth around the arms worn by bandits. Flavorful, but nothing really to talk about there. Bandit garb. We've read that. Bandit mask. Mask of black cloth that covers the mouth. Favored by bandits for hiding their faces, it also provides some protection against poison. So we can see that the immunity, if you see underneath the resistance, immunity is the trait that governs like poison resistance, and that's 30 is pretty high. So we are pretty good at not getting poisoned here. But nothing else really there to discuss. Bone arrow, arrow whittled from thin animal bones, craftable item. The feather fletching adds distance to the arrow's flight. Just gameplay there. Short bow. Small bow made to fire arrows over great distances. Other than its ability to fire off arrows in rapid succession, it is also well suited for use on horseback. To use a bow, arrows must also be equipped. I don't typically play with bows that much because it's annoying to craft the arrows. And 30 arrows goes really quickly. You would be surprised how quickly that goes. But nothing really to talk about there. Great knife. Large knife with a broad, curved blade. This weapon is designed to slash and rend, inflicting blood loss upon the recipient. All this tells us is, if you can see under passive effects, it causes blood loss buildup. And then in parentheses, 38. 38 is a pretty low number for blood buildup, but this weapon can bleed enemies out. What happens then is that they lose a set percent of their HP, which is pretty strong. Buckler, a small metal round shield. The bump in the center is designed to parry. A well-timed parry deflects an enemy's attack, breaking their stance and leaving them open to a critical hit. Though risk is inherent, this shield favors aggression. Nothing really to talk about there. Memory of Grace. Now we've got something. The memory of first grace, which once guided bygone tarnished to the lands between. Lose all runes and return to last sight of great visited. It is merely a cycle. Stand before the Elden Ring, become the Elden Lord. Much to discuss. First, the grace itself, or the design itself, looks very similar to how a sunset or the reflection of sun looks upon water, right? If you can look at the bottom of the inventory screen, we can see a sort of field of water with a sun far off in the distance lighting the water itself. And that effect is very similar to the effect that we see here. The description itself, though, the memory of first grace. So this is just a memory. This is Elden Ring likes to use things that are both literal and figurative, right? So a memory is something that is intangible, here made tangible, or like semi-tangible. And this is also the icon that sort of appears in the opening cutscene with all of the different dead tarnished that you see. This is somewhere in that image, presumably guiding them back from death and to the lands between. Interesting that the description says that this once guided bygone tarnished to the lands between, implying that it does not anymore. After all, in our opening cutscene, we don't get that. We don't get that symbol. We get a Firefly-esque thing. Not quite sure what to make of that, but interesting nonetheless. And then in the third paragraph here, we get sort of one of the major themes of the game, right? Which is all this is a cycle. The Elden Ring, the Elden Lord. I think the implication is people will go to war over this power, attain the power, and then someone else will steal it from them later. There is a concept known as and I'm going to butcher the Latin here, Rota Fortunae, which is the original Wheel of Fortune, which was a pretty common image within medieval manuscripts, which, in so many words, showed that power and status is gifted to you by fortune, and the nature of power itself is capricious, right? Like, one day you will have power, one day you will lose it. People yearn for your own power, people fall out of power, but the wheel itself will always turn, crushing those who are a part of the cycle under the wheel. Fun fact: when Daenerys Targaryen says that she's going to break the wheel, this is part of what I think the writers and George R. R. Martin are referencing. This idea that power is in this eternal wheel that is harmful for everyone involved. And I think that's the theme that the game is here trying to present. There's nothing virtuous about this cycle. It is merely a cycle, after all. And this is a bit of a stretch, but the Elden Ring, after all, is, in the shape of a ring. There we go. I just turned up the brightness. Hopefully that's a little bit better for YouTube. But this is where we've washed ashore, as it were, surrounded by coffins which have been here for quite some time. We will come back to this area once we get a torch and we can see sort of what the deal is. But let's talk to our first NPC, who says, "Brave Tarnished, take the plunge of learning and remembrance. Recall the arts of war in your warrior's blood." In other words, this is the tutorial. Please do it. When this game first came out, a bunch of game devs were like, they had to put someone in here to point you towards the tutorial, which is kind of silly to me. Our first site of grace. You can see this icon looks very similar to the Memory of Grace icon. Once we light it, nothing really changes. The grace itself is an interesting effect to me. It's a little ghost-like. I have a lot more to say about it, but I won't for now. Just to note that the physical presence of it appears to be literally growing spouts. It's a plant spouts, right? This is a life-giving thing. That this little side of it is literally producing life. But nothing else to know here except we're in the Cave of Knowledge, which is a funny thing to call your tutorial area. Our first enemy. Hello. Oh, I scared him. Not the best enemy in the whole world. That's what we're here for. These guys, I believe, are wandering nobles, and you can sort of get that sense from them that they don't really know how to use their swords. They're sort of trying their best. You can see remnants of noble gear around them, but they have long lost their minds and are nothing more than husks now. If you attack somebody directly behind them, you'll pull off a backstab, which does a lot of damage. That is technically a crit. The base critical modifier is 100. This is 110, which is a bit more than you would think. It's actually pretty high. So I say that to say this weapon does more backstab damage than a lot of other weapons. I can't remember if any of these guys drop their stuff or not. Signs point to no so far, I have to say. One of these guys is going to teach us how to parry here in a second, I think. But we get this beautiful cave here, and then a guy up there shooting arrows at us, which I think is meant to teach us that if you don't see how to get up to somebody, keep walking, and eventually you will. Ouch. Come on, attack me. Ooh, I'm not as familiar with the buckler parry here. Attack me. Each enemy has... If you hold up your shield and you block, that uses your stamina, which is the green bar up there. And when you run out of stamina, you get set up for a critical there. 2 enemies here. Nope. That was really bad. And I managed to hit the backstab without even meaning to. Can I parry you? Nope. Nope. Almost did. Came close. I feel like that should have. Come on, man. That's alright. It's been some time since I've done PvE here. Hello. Goodbye. What the hell. Welcome too. There we go. You just gotta learn the timings for really like all of the enemies. But here we are back in the advancing in the Cave of Knowledge, and I'm not gonna toy with my food at all here. I think this is the spot where you learn that you can stealth. Oh, there are. I have not been reading them, but there are. Are they? Oh, maybe not. Oh, I think they might be hidden. But there, if you're playing the game for the first time, it'll just tell you the controls here. So you can pretty easily get a backstab on this guy. And then this is like the only interesting part of this area for me, which is that they show you the like final boss area through the opening in the wall. I guess not that interesting as I say it out loud, but it's kind of fun, I think. I don't know, I appreciate it anyways. This guy's got a lot more health than the other ones. That might be the only time I've ever like stance broken one of these enemies. Here we get a statue of America with her arms missing. Her arms in a sort of embrace, as you can kind of imagine, which is separate or different from sort of her arms acting as branches. These statues are found all around the lands between, and they allow you to respawn at them if you die. Typically, when you die, you respawn at a site of grace, but if you're within range, you can sort of see at the top left there. Oops. If you say that icon, then you know that you will respawn there. That's embarrassing. I was going to say before I humiliated myself by dying that this boss spawned a bunch of memes on like day 5 of this game coming out, which was what if this guy was like statue of or soldier of God, Rick, and actually he's the toughest boss in the game, which was a like thing that was funny for maybe a day. And then people just sort of ran it into the ground almost immediately. Pretty easy to backstab him though. Also funny because FromSoft typically uses very hard bosses as their first introduction to the player, and this guy is typically a cakewalk. But as these bloodstains would suggest, you know, if you're brand new to the game, he's not the easiest boss in the world. But now we're back where we started. And for our efforts, we see some more coffins and get a jester. Strength. Great. Let's do it. Yeah. Okay. Enough of that. If you started with the stone sword keys, or whatever they're called, you can access this dungeon, but it is meant to be played when you're at, I don't know, level like 50 or 60 or something, not level 10 as we are now. So I will come back. I won't forget, but we also get an item here, the Finger Severer and the Tarnished Furrowed Finger. Ooh, and we got a lot. These were all the little pop-ups that I didn't see. We don't need to go over them, really. Tarnished Furrowed Finger. This is for online play. A finger of corpse wax, furrowed like a hook. It is a relic of those who came before, left to help those who would come after. Shining as gold, or which suggests, again, this is part of the tree religion. And the Finger Severer, used when you have been summoned to return to your own world. This phantom blade severs the link formed by a furrowed finger, but the maidens scorn those who abuse its use. Basically saying, don't summon people in and then immediately send them back home. I'm not really sure what this item is meant to be. It looks like a knife that is made out of a finger, but the knife blade itself, I don't know. It looks odd to me. It is lustrous in a sort of a strange way. Roller fruit, berry-like red fruits that grow in shrubs, material used for crafting items. Easily found everywhere in the lanes between. It has a wide variety of uses. Great. Oh, and yeah, that's right. It gives you a thing like, hey, jump in that hole. You won't regret it. This elevator that we now bring ourselves up through, fully functional and seems to be doesn't carry any of the explicit tree imagery, I don't think. It's got this sort of natural imagery with this leaf or vine motif. But to me, the architecture of it predates the tree religion a bit. The candles also are sort of a blue flame, which we will learn indicates something was much older than the tree religion. Let's do the best part of the game to me, which is this very beginning here. What a beautiful game! I mean, goodness. The music here also just fills me with nostalgia. You can see way over there that's where we started, way up on that jagged cliff. Behind it, another area, and then far off in the distance we can see mountains of a far off land that never will we see. I always like to rest here to see what this is. The first step, which is, I think, just a fun little thing of being like, literally this is where you are meant to wind up. This is meant to be your first introduction into this world. But let's talk to this guy.
Oh, yes. Tarnished, are we? Come to the lands between for the Elden Ring? Of course you have. No shame in it. Unfortunately for you, however, you are maidenless. Without guidance, without the strength of runes, and without an invitation to the Round Table Hold, you are fated, it seems, to die in obscurity. Luckily for you, however, there is one shining ray of hope for even the maidenless. Me, Vare. Take care to listen. Are you familiar with grace? The golden light that gives life to you, Tarnished. You may also behold its golden rays, pointing in a particular direction at times. That is the guidance of grace, a path that a Tarnished must travel Indeed. Grace's guidance holds the answers. It will lead you, Tarnished, to the path you are meant to follow, even if it leads you to your grave. Grace's guidance will reveal the path forward, most certainly, to Castle Stormvale, over on the cliff, the home of the decrepit demigod, Godric the Grafted. It's time you set off, I should think, to Castle Stormvale on the cliff, where Grace would guide you, if you seek the Elden Ring, maidenless as you are. It's time to...
So a bunch of people have... I mean, this is the first person you experience in the game, right? So a bunch of... So he's very, like, I would say overanalyzed. I am not the first person to point out that you like leave this stranded graveyard, come to him, and he's like, "Oh, you're maidenless. You don't have a maiden now, do you?" Where we just literally saw our maiden dead on the chapel floor, and then, this guy's like, "Oh, no maiden. Well, I can guide you. Let me show you what to do." At least a little bit suspicious. His outfit isn't doing him any favors in terms of like building trust with us, the audience. So I think a reasonable thing to assume is that he killed the maiden and then sets up here to catch unsuspecting Tarnished into his web, right? So that he may guide them how he wants to guide them. I forget exactly what he said. You will behold, or you may behold the rays of grace pointing in a particular direction. I think with these games, it's always important to like remember what you're doing, why are you doing it, and who does it benefit that you do these things, right? So someone wants us to go this direction. Someone wants us to go to the castle on the cliff and kill Godric, right? The question is who and why. A question that will be answered in time, maybe. And at this here, we get the small golden effigy, which allows you to send cooperative summon signs to summoning pools, where your objective is to defeat the area boss of the world to which you were summoned. You can press Y to activate the summoning pools, and now when I use this item, my sign gets sent over to all of the different pools I've activated. But we're not going to be doing cooperative play here, really. Here we have the Tree Sentinel, who I will try and beat once. That's always my and deal with myself whenever I start a new playthrough. I can try and beat him once, and then after that I gotta go level up a little bit. Ouchie. And that's it. Alright, that's fine. We'll go get some better gear. We'll go level up a little bit, and we will be back. I don't think I've ever noticed that unicorn horde that I just saw, but I do want my runes back, so I will be taking those, please and thank you. But I'm gonna try and sneak around him. Be a little sneaky. Oh. I've already failed. But that's okay. Don't mind me, I'm just one... Nope. You can't get in here. I think. Oh. Goodbye. When you rest at a grace, it resets the world around you, including all enemies. So now that guy is back there, and we are safe. Let's talk to this Santa.
You're tarnished. I can see it. And I can also see that you're not after my throat. Then why not purchase a little something? I am Carly, purveyor of fine goods. I am of a nomadic people, selling wares as I travel. The land has been tainted by madness since the shattering of the Elden Ring. It's only tarnished like yourself, who keep things from drying up entirely. Let's say you're a very welcome customer.
This is always funny to me because he's like, please buy something. But we don't meet anybody for like, is there a functioning market economy in this world? like, what are you doing with stuff I give you? But then we learn that we are giving him runes, and presumably runes represent strength, right? So presumably he is using those runes for his own strength. I'm going to do something very suboptimal and by the telescope, which is going to be
nice to do business.
Crucial for this playthrough. And let's read the descriptions. Telescope. Astrology tool used by members of the Carian royal family. A stolen part of a larger instrument. Allows the viewer to better see faraway things. During the age of the Erd Tree, Carian astrology withered on the vine. The fate once writ in the night skies had been fettered by the Golden Order. I've got to remember to come back to this item when we, for real, talk about the Carians and astrology itself. Another note here, there was a thing called the Age of the Erd Tree that we are no longer in anymore, right? Which I think we can assume based off that first clause. And again, like the astrologer description, we get this idea that there is fate somehow written in the night skies. Again, a little unclear to me, like, are they people who are reading the night skies then, like, interpreting the fate in sort of the same way that, like, seers or, like, prophets of old or whatever would say that they heard words from some higher up being, when many of them were, I think it's a pretty common trope to imagine that many of them were just, like, making it up and doing whatever would benefit them in that moment, right? Who knows? There were a couple of other notes or new items, I think. Erdleaf flower, a dusky yellow flower that has started to fade to brown, found throughout the lanes between, material used for crafting items. Said to be fed by leaves that fell from the Erd Tree in days of antiquity. So in days of antiquity, there were leaves falling from the Erd Tree here. We can sort of see, like, I think yeah, that's just a leaf that is still falling. The fallen leaves tell a story, but what story? They're still falling, and we know that for certain. We can also see the sun here, which is a relatively uncommon sight here in the lands between. I mean, there's not a lot to say. It's the sun, but it is not providing any light, and presumably no warmth here to this land. We can also see the moon immediately next to it, which appears to have a, like, carving on it. You can kind of make it out. I'll stop moving so that I can draw on this later. Oh, perfect. You can really see it now that the environment has changed to raining. Yeah, there's a carving there, I think. More on that later. Oh, there it goes. I think these clouds are just gorgeous. I think someone did a really good job building out this skybox here. But that's enough dilly-dally for now. Let's make our way to the first dungeon, or at least the first one that I like to do in any event. And I guess we're doing it with just the dagger, which is cool and fun. We got a bolt. It's ammunition used for crossbows, a widespread common type of bolt. Great, thanks. There is some environmental storytelling here that I think FromSoft does really well in terms of, like, this is introducing you to how FromSoft is telling their story, right? So we can see that there are guards patrolling back and forth this road, and guards investigating something. Here, this guy's investigating a murdered merchant of some description, perhaps. Presumably the guard didn't kill him. Maybe he's looking for items, but he's not really. We don't have an animation like to suggest that. He dropped a kukri? A large knife used for throwing. Its curved blade is sharp enough to slice the flesh cleanly. Throw at enemies to inflict damage and build up onset of blood loss. This heavy throwing weapon is unsuitable for swift attacks, but is able to inflict heavy damage. We may or may not use these here. You know, sort of, who knows? Like many #gamers, if you throw a consumable item at me, I'm going to save it until I really need it, and then I'm never going to really need it. But I was saying that we got the guards sort of called out here to investigate something, perhaps. We've also got root resin to read. Resin secreted from the roots of the great tree can also be found near trees on the surface, material used in crafting items. The roots of the great tree were once linked to those of the Erd tree, or so they say, and it is for this reason catacombs are built around great tree roots. Okay, I can't, I'm not equipped to talk about this here. So now there's something called the Erd tree and something called the great tree, and are they different? Are they similar? Are they built on top of one another? Are they using the same root system? Or are they not? I'm going to make a note to talk about that once we get to the first catacombs. Okay, full disclosure, it has been about a day since I made that cut. But I remember what I was saying, which was that I was making the point that there are some knights here on patrol. There is a merchant who has been killed by something, which is right here, sort of off the path. Oh, not here. Well, he's around here somewhere. Oh, here he is. Killed. We've got knights investigating. Up here, we've got a knight investigating his what looks like a fallen comrade, perhaps? No, as we get closer, we can see that it's just another broken down carriage or something to that effect. And we follow the path into our very first cave, the Groveside Cave. Sometimes the name of the dungeon is a little evocative or, means something, but here we are literally in a cave that is beside a grove. And the storytelling continues. We've got what looks like was once a hideout or place of rest or, somewhere people hung out. Now overrun with dogs who are prowling around here. And if we go further this way, we can see a dead body and a dog who's mad at us. The glowing eyes there means that they have a bit more health and drop a few more runes. Oh, I think we got our first bleed out of the entire game here. We got the pack leader here. And a dead corpse here. With another cracked pot. While I have a chance, let's take a look at these two new items we got. We got thin beast bones, thin hard beast bones, material used for crafting items, found by hunting beasts, commonly used to make disposable weapons. More on that in just a second. Cave moss, faintly luminescent moss that grows in dark caves, material used in crafting items, a fundamental ingredient for medicinal boluses. Nothing super interesting about those two except for the boss we're about to fight and sort of general themes of the game, I would say. We've got some interesting sort of language or, I don't know, definitions, I suppose, of what is and what isn't a beast. These wolves, I think, are pretty clearly beasts, but again, more on that in a moment. We got a glowstone, a polished ruin fragment that shines brighter than rainbow stone, craftable item. Emits light from the location it is placed, illuminating surroundings. However, the effect is short-lived and it lacks the diverse colors of rainbow stones. May serve some benefit in dark places or at night. I don't think I've ever once used any of these. Perhaps I'm just not a very good player. And we got some silver fireflies. Firefly that gives off a silvery light, material used in crafting items found near bodies of cold water untouched by sunlight. The light of fireflies is believed to have an alluring magic. Silver light is considered to invite riches. I've been pretty involved in like the lore community. I've watched a lot of videos, read a lot of stuff. I'm sure I've read this somewhere before, but this is, if I have, I've forgotten it. Silver light is considered to invite riches is an interesting wrench into the mix of the whole sort of alchemical idea that Elden Ring is playing with. And an alluring magic is interesting. Is this a sort of enchantment magic, or is the like idea of magic itself alluring? I think both of those are sort of interesting ways to read it. Well, we'll have to come back to that. But in this cave, we will instead keep pressing forward. So we found this dog lying next to this murdered Godric knight. So we've got this idea of someone murdered all these knights, left the dogs alone, presumably, because we got a lot of corpses. The dogs weren't like in the act of eating the corpses, so we can presume that these were like loyal to the knights in some respect. Sorry, I realized that this like dark area is probably horrible for YouTube. I should have bought a torch from Kale, but we'll get that soon enough. But that's it for this cave. Sort of a short and easy cave to whet your appetite for the game. And here we got our first real boss. So let's get into it. The Beastman of Farum Azula, who is in fact eating a corpse as we walk in here. And he's swinging sort of wildly. This was the very first boss that I fought when I first started the game. This was like minute 20 into playing the game. And he's pretty easy once you get the timings down. He says as he's immediately struggles. Ouch. You want him to go for that roar attack, because then he stays in place there for a little bit, and you can get some pretty good damage off on him. Can't remember if you can backstab him. I don't think so. Well, thank you. You can even use this time to heal. Let's try it. Oh, you can. I don't know why I wasn't two-handing there before. Elden Ring does seem to have some sort of... I mean, lots of games do this, where roars do, like, physical damage to people. Not in this case, but it's a way to, like, access your more bestial nature, I suppose. Oops. What you don't want to do is get stuck next to a wall. It's a surefire recipe to die. Oops. Backstab. Yep. And that was the Beastman of Farum Azula. And he dropped the Flame Drake Talisman, which we will read now. Talisman depicting a red ancient dragon boosts fire damage negation. The ancient dragons, who ruled in the prehistoric era before the Erdtree, would protect their lord as a wall of living rock. And so it is that the shape of the dragon has become symbolic of all manner of protections. On the actual talisman itself, it's sort of hard to make out, but that's the shape of a dragon. The bottom is the tail, and there's two wings. So a couple of things here. We get a distinction between what ancient dragons, which seem to be different from like some other type of dragon, or else they wouldn't have the ancient modifier or adjective. Another interesting thing here is the prehistoric era. Prehistory, like by definition, is the period of time before written records. So, as like cool as these ancient dragons were, they were not literate, presumably. I guess you could also imagine that the game text here implies that it is only a cycle, right? So there was then some sort of empire of dragons that ruled before the Erdtree. Presumably the Erdtree had to usurp this rule of dragons, right? So we get that continuing theme of cyclical, empire. Also interesting that the Beastman of Farum Azula drops the talisman that connects him with ancient dragons. And certainly seems to not be literate himself, although more on that later in just a second. But before I hand it off to future me, let's read the golden rune before I forget. Grace that dwells within the inhabitants of the lands between, the lingering trace of gold, used to gain 200 runes. Runes are nourishment for the development of any tarnished, provided a finger maiden can be found. ... Ours is dead. How will we find one? Oh no. I think it'll probably be fine. And I think that's where I'm going to end this playthrough here, and I'll hand it off to future me. Thanks, past me. This series is examining the themes of Elden Ring's bosses, and luckily this boss has its theme in the name. Beastman of Farum Azula. It's just right there in the name. So now I guess the question is, am I going to spend 10 minutes talking about what makes a beast and what makes a man? Well, maybe one day I'll do a similar series with Bloodborne, and I will spend much more than 10 minutes talking about the differences between beasts and men. But here I'll use that as a starting point. Bloodborne takes part in a very old trope that FromSoft loves to use, presenting the player with both men and beasts, showing horrible atrocities perpetrated by those men, and then ending with some variant on man is the real beast. I think the Beastman of Farum Azula evolves out of that trope. So then, to start, let's investigate to what extent he is a beast and to what extent he is a man. Let's begin with man. What aspects of this boss design read to us as this is a person? Well, first and foremost is the armor. This armor fits the Beastman comfortably, meaning it was likely created for the Beastman, and is not like any other armor that we've seen so far in the game. So I think we can assume that this armor is from Farum Azula, and therefore Farum Azula has or had metallurgy and smitheries. We can also note the hair. It is wild and mane-like, but still braided and tied together with ornamentation, especially the two thick braids at the front. This beast we see in front of us was once smart enough and quote-unquote civilized enough to braid and decorate hair. Speaking of ornamentation, this beast is dressed like a king. Bracelets, literal crowns used as hair ornamentation, a royal circlet. We are looking at royalty, but there is no empire here. There are no subjects here. There are only the dead bodies that the Beastman is feasting on. Let me take a quick tangent here to note that Elden Ring hides a lot of NPC and character eyes from the player's view, and the Beastman is no different. The crown haphazardly placed over the eyes feels more intentional on Elden Ring's part than the Beastman, meaning it looks like it's there by coincidence, not that the Beastman is purposefully hiding his eyes from us. This begs the question, what is the circlet hiding? How would seeing his eyes change our perception of this character? Those questions are hard, if not impossible, to answer. But perhaps the storytelling is the circlet itself that is covering the eyes. Perhaps this Beastman was both symbolically and literally blinded by power or the trappings of royalty. After all, this is now the second boss that connects royalty with monsters. Anyways, The weapon initially reads as makeshift to me, like it's cut off from a slab of iron. But once we see the Beastman use it, it becomes clear that real thought and intelligence went into the weapon. For instance, the Beastman is intelligent enough to switch between one-handing and two-handing the weapon. In any case, the Beastman is using a weapon, which puts him a step above a lot of other beasts, such as the wolves that drop thin beast bones that attack by biting at you. This Beastman has a vicious-looking maw, but chooses not to use it when attacking. Instead, his moveset seems reminiscent of some old fighting style, again suggesting the memories of an old civilization. Alright, so we've considered how this boss reads as a person. To what extent does the boss read as a beast? Well, appearance is number one with the bullet. The hair, though decorated, still resembles an unkept mane. He has a wolf-like tail and a maw that seems almost cartoonish to me, resembling something like the Maw Ray from Mario Odyssey more than it resembles a wolf's mouth. And most importantly, when we enter the boss arena, we find the Beastman eating a corpse. This is a wild creature, and it is hungry. As a side note, this boss resolves the fun little murder mystery that the environmental storytelling sets up. We see guards patrolling and investigating a crime site, enter the cave, and find all the men killed but their beasts left alive, still sitting loyally by their side, and eventually stumble upon the carnivorous Beastman. But anyways, the fact that the Beastman is reduced to eating flesh when we meet it, and yet still summons enough of its human part to stand and fight with its weapon rather than lunge at you with jaw unhinged, gives it a sense of tragedy to me. Even after it has lost the ability to smith iron and decorate hair, some small part of the creature still stands upright and fights. The Beastman is both beast and man. He is attacking brutally and near mindlessly, but his fighting style is just learned enough and just honed enough to suggest a real intelligence there, or at least the memory of intelligence. At some point, he was part of a civilization that could build armor and valued finery. Today, this creature is all that is left. I think we're looking at the tragic end of Elden Ring's version of flowers for Algernon. There is one other element of the design that I haven't touched on, the skeletal nature of the beast. I don't think it's immediately obvious when we look at the creature, but the fleshlessness, for lack of a better word, is mostly apparent in the legs. We're looking at something undead, in the same way that everything in the lands between seems horrifically immortal. These are literal bones of some past royal, still desperately clinging to life, and in the way that empires are, still rapacious, never able to be satisfied. We will expound more on this later, but still I want to mark the presence of death and decay here. This is a world undying, stuffed to the brim with civilizations and empires that have long since fallen, but still refuse to die. Through this boss, we discover one of those civilizations. So, a picture forms of a society or empire that had some semblance of societal structure where this Beastman was at or near the top. The society was advanced enough to craft fine ornamentation and perfectly weighted curved greatswords. Perhaps they weren't Beastmen at this point, they were just men. And at some unknown inflection point of history, the Wheel of Fortune, the Rota Fortunae, turned on them, and they were reduced to Beastmen once again. After all, it is merely a cycle. All his finery and ornaments were not enough to prevent his descent into beasthood. The Beastman is wearing proof that he was once part of a great civilization, but he is completely unable to recognize that proof. Today, all it remembers how to do is fight and kill and eat.